I'm particularly worried and interested in helping young people understand that they do not have to identify out of being a female in order to live a happy and healthy life. You're seeing more and more young people today getting these botched double mastectomies.
Need some advice on nipple grafts. These young people shouldn't even have access to this surgery. This is what I'm telling you. They're rushing. They're going without any mental health care. Now they're going to have to live with this for the rest of their lives. Dude, I don't think people can even understand.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about gender affirming care and some of the things that I see about the affirmation model that are very problematic, particularly with young people, children, even people into their early 20s. I have a problem with the model overall, but today's focus is going to be mainly on the problem with gender affirming care as it pertains to young people. But before we get into any of that today, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And I want to give a big shout out to everybody who's been tuning in, listening, subscribing to the channel, having thoughtful conversation down in the comments, liking, sharing. I appreciate it so much. And I know it's still a fairly small group of you out there, but it means a lot when you start to gain traction, especially when you're talking about subject matters like this that are very, very controversial and difficult to talk about. So again, I appreciate it so very much. Let's keep liking and sharing so we can make it up to 1,000 subscribers. So the first thing I kind of want to get into, and I guess if I were to bullet point this, it would be a top 5. And the number 5 is going to be the lies that have been told the last 10 years with regards to a lot of this supposed care. And, that puberty blockers are fully reversible. A child will off themselves if they don't transition. So those things right there build a lot of mistrust. And, don't forget the WPATH files. I mean, they fully admitted that a 14-year-old doesn't understand the full ramifications of transition. And yet they still keep pushing this.
Leaked files from the World Professional Association of Transgender Health are showing widespread medical malpractice on children and adults who seek care through the organization. The group Environmental Progress has published the raw files in a shocking new report. Environmental Progress founder Michael Schellenberger wrote, "The WPATH files show that what is called gender medicine is neither science nor medicine. The experiments are not randomized, double-blind, or controlled. It's not medicine, since the first rule is to do no harm, and that requires informed consent."
They're telling you that a child really knows themselves and that they know better than anybody else, and they can know as young as 3 that they're actually trans. And if you just use a little bit of common sense, you would know that they don't even have the vocabulary for such a thing yet. So the reality is that children are not born in the wrong body, despite all of these things that are being peddled and told to us again and again and again. Even in the vein of trans joy, that's not really a thing. That is a marketing tool. It's all ideology. I mean, look at Elliot Page.
This sounds cruel, but fuck it. I would put money on it that Elliot Page is probably incredibly miserable. I've seen this person's interviews. As much trans joy as Elliot is oozing, it looks a lot like on the edge of jumping off a cliff. It looks like incredibly depressed. What the fuck did I do? Now I'm all in, so I might as well just ride this thing out. That's what it looks like.
My message to my younger self would just be like, you know who you are, and please embrace that. I feel for me I understood my truth. I felt it very strongly, and it was all of these external forces and noises that pushed and pulled and made me sort of lose track of who I was.
So number 4 is going to be, just because you say you're trans or think you're trans doesn't mean that you are. The social contagion thing and rapid onset gender dysphoria has really come to the forefront of in appearing that is the cause for such a huge spike in trans identities over the last 10 years, 5 to 10 years or so, that other comorbidities may point to why someone thinks they're trans in the first place. Dissociative identity disorder, borderline, abuse of some kind. Or perhaps maybe it's just as simple as the fact that the kid is gay or lesbian. And they're just conflating these things because gender ideology is, I think, by design, kind of meant to be confusing, especially for young, vulnerable people who are already confused about their identity. You know, who the heck knew who they were when they were 10, 11, 12, 13? Gosh, like I said, even into your early 20s. Life is very hard to navigate as a young person or even a young adult, even without a gender crisis being part of it. So I really believe a lot of this is stuff that is being put in kids' heads based upon social media, social pressures, perhaps, and that kids today are out there talking about this and they almost believe that it is something that is going to solve all of their problems, make them feel better, and even as an escape. I'm particularly worried and interested in helping young people understand that they do not have to identify out of being a female in order to live a happy and healthy life. You're seeing more and more young people today getting these botched double mastectomies.
Talking about their surgeon, she has failed in and increased the risk of infection and harm by improperly removing extra tissue, fat, and skin that was left over, and she left extra skin. She scrunched up the skin up to the incisions and created skin folds and crease that are not gender affirming nor aesthetically pleasing or similar to a cis man's chest. I've been incredibly distressed by the appearance of my incisions, debating whether or not they were normal. I really think you need to present to an emergency room for immediate care. My heart goes out to you. The person asking, is like this normal? Need some advice on my nipple grafts. You need to go to the doctor and a different doctor friend. Rant, help. To make a long story short, I thought I was supposed to be having surgery at the end of December, but due to complications with insurance and WPATH and not being a minor anymore, it was covered under being a minor. Now it's, look at that. I can't even understand what that is. What is this? What is that? What is that, you guys? Come on. What? This just can't be. This one says, are they looking okay? Nope, doesn't look okay at all. And why are you asking people in a forum and not going to your doctor? Because your doctor can't answer it. That's why. Has anyone had a similar experience at 3.5 months? What? I've never seen any chests like this before. What's going on, people? We need to literally sue all of these doctors. Need some advice on nipple grafts. These young people shouldn't even have access to this surgery. This is what I'm telling you. They're rushing. They're going without any mental health care. Now they're going to have to live with this for the rest of their lives. I don't think people can even understand.
These surgeons that are doing this obviously don't care about the gender affirming care that they're getting if they're giving them surgeries that are deliberately scarring, or they're done in such a sloppy way because they're a bad surgeon and they're just doing it for a money grab. That is deeply concerning. And these young people believe that this is some kind of badge of honor, and it just isn't. So a lot of these young people, a lot of these young girls, a lot of them are just tomboys. I have said it before that I think I probably could have gotten dragged into this if I had been a lot younger, growing up and trying to understand my sexuality, that I would have thought that, bingo, I'm trans and that's why my sexual orientation is the way it is. And it's actually a problem with I was supposed to be born a boy. That's what a lot of these tomboys are being told and led to believe. And you have to remember too, that when you're a young young girl and you're going through puberty, you go through immense amount of changes, and they're very uncomfortable changes. And you're also seeing a shift in the way you're viewed by the world as your breasts start to develop, as you start to go into puberty and get your period. These things are really stressful and difficult for young women. And I think a lot of young women just want to identify out of that, because then it puts them in the driver's seat. It makes them feel in control. The way the perception of manhood is, and that being a man puts you in a different power position. So that's an issue as well. And none of these things are being addressed. Instead, they keep hammering away at the answer being gender affirming care for practically everybody. So little to no therapy. So that kind of plays into the idea that some of this stuff could be because of a comorbidity, right? So if you don't have any therapy and you don't have any pushback and you are simply affirmed, it's sort of skipping over all of those other possibilities that may have led you to believe you're trans in the first place. And it's also one of the only models out there that kind of enables you to self-diagnose. And I'm not really sure who thought that was a good idea, or why we continue to do this, and why people haven't stopped yet and said, oh, that's right. That's kind of strange that you're putting the patient in the complete driver's seat to go through all of this and it be completely okay. So number two, it makes it so that you can't weigh any of the risks, right? So you're fast tracked through this affirmation process where it's, okay, well, you're probably trans and it's up to you to make that decision whether or not you want to go on hormones or what you want to do, right? And it feels like a lot of these gender doctors are disingenuous, and they want to fast track the patients so that they don't even have time to think about those risks and weigh the pros and cons. A lot of these young people are being asked at the age of 14 if they think they want to have kids in the future, because infertility is a possibility and very likely. Most kids that age don't think they want to have kids, because guess what? You're not fully cognitively developed yet. So you're not thinking in those terms. You're thinking in 14-year-old boy or girl terms. The puberty blocker effects. They say it can affect the frontal lobe, your bone development, again, your infertility. They say that your ability to develop romantic feelings may never happen, or one day to even have a healthy sex life as an adult. I mean, how can we sit here and take these things away from young people so that later on in life, they don't have the choice to do those things because of a decision that we placed on them as adults while they were kids? What I'm deeply bothered by is all of the adults in the room that continue to cheer this on and not proceed with any caution, because they're so caught up in the ideology, in the virtue signaling, in the pandering of all of this. But the general public doesn't really understand what gender affirming care even actually means. And the terms affirming care, they sound so good. It sounds so positive. How could you say no? So then number one is just the regret, and the amount of people that are coming out and saying that they were either tricked into this, that they were in a bad place in their life, that they actually did have other comorbidities that made them believe they were trans, and those topics were never explored with a therapist, and that their lives have pretty much been altered forever.
Lea Jane. I'm 18 years old, and I am a woman who has detransitioned. I am actively suing Kaiser Permanente, and I'm suing the doctors that gave me those treatments related to my transition.
I think you're one of the youngest detransitioners other than myself that I know of, and you actually started transitioning a year earlier than I did, and 2 years before I got my vasectomy. You were 12 when you started testosterone blockers, right?
Yeah.
Blockers.
Initially, yeah, they started me on Lupron, and then they put me on testosterone.
You got your mastectomy at 13, just a few years after you started puberty. And that makes me upset personally. How do you feel about that? What's it like dealing with that?
It's very conflicting. But honestly, I'm very upset that it was done to me so young, and also not to mention in a headspace where I just shouldn't have been able to make those kind of decisions. You know, I actually had never seen like a diagram of like a breast and like the organ and like the lactation, like organs, like the glands and all that until really recently. I saw a diagram. They never showed anything like that to me, and they really watered it down and just called it top surgery, not a
Not a
radical
double mastectomy.
double mastectomy, what it was.
What do you think made you think maybe I'm not just gay, but maybe I'm trans? When did you first have that sort of a thought?
I was 12. I didn't really know because a lot of people just called me gay throughout school. So it just kind of made sense. And so I did go along with that. I had no idea even what being transgender was, what a trans person was until I saw it online and I saw it on TV. And when I was 12, 13 years old, that was when the TLC show wasn't out, but Jennings was doing interviews. I also was exposed to a lot of transgender people online.
Detransitioning is just 1% of people who transition. What do you say to that?
I'd say it probably used to be. When I started my transition, I actually looked into this. I was like, okay, so are there people that, and this was about a decade ago I transitioned. I said, are there people that regret this? It was very difficult to find any stories. Now you have thousands of kids. And of course, only a tiny fraction of people who really go through that are going to want to put their story out. So you can only assume it's like 10 times that. Because unfortunately, we have a crisis in this country with mental health professionals that would rather quickly, sign a thing and get you on pills, even though it may not be your problem. For me, I also experienced that. I experienced walking into a doctor's office and they gave me a prescription for estrogen and sort of a roadmap for future surgeries within 30 minutes max. And it was only by the luck of, a roll of a dice that this ended up being what was right for me personally on an individual level. But unfortunately, a lot of people are falling through the cracks, children and adults, a lot of autistic.
These things are not reversible. If you have a double mastectomy, the only way you can get your breasts back is by getting implants, and those aren't actual breasts. So, and the idea that there's doctors out there telling people that that is what would happen and it's okay, that you have a plan B, those aren't plan Bs. Those aren't solutions. There's something insidious about the entire process of all of this. I think the therapy aspect of this is key here, regardless if you try to go live as the opposite sex or not. We need to do an exploratory and a discovery on people that are in this belief that they are born in the wrong body or that they don't belong in the sex that they were born as for whatever reason. And I do think gender dysphoria on some level is very much real and can be very crippling for some people, but the actual transition process even still should be a last resort. And they're also finding that with young people that are dysphoric, they usually adjust out of it by the time they've reached the age of 18, maybe a little bit later. I mean, obviously some of that is very subjective, but most people kind of grow out of it and they're usually just gay or lesbian or maybe not. So I don't think that we have enough research. I don't think we have enough data. I think by pushing this affirmation agenda, we're coming up with a lot of really negative data that shows that it doesn't work. So I really do think we need to do a U-turn, and I am seeing some of that traction, at least with some states and some other countries that are starting to put the brakes on a lot of this. But we have a long way to go because, again, like I said earlier, I don't think the general public understands what this even is, what the processes are, what these surgeries entail, what testosterone does to young women, and how it wreaks havoc on your body. So those are things that I think need to be talked about more. And I think we'll get into those specifics more on this channel too, about that. But my whole thing is the affirmation model, I think, is just pure garbage. I do think it's a pharmaceutical money grab to a large extent, and that there's a lot of money to be made on this. There's a lot of money to be made in the surgeries as well. And any doctor out there that has been operating on young people for this purpose, I think they should have their license revoked. I think they should be investigated. I just don't understand how ethically and morally you can do something like that. For example, Marcy Bowers of San Francisco, California, she is a gender affirming care surgeon, and she did Jennings surgeries. And I don't know if you've ever seen that show, but she pretty much, and I call Jazz a she because she doesn't know any different. I mean, they had her believing she was a girl since she was the age of 3.
I'll never forget one day I was at the computer and Jazz came up to me and she said, "Mom, when is the good fairy going to come with her magic wand and change my penis into a vagina?" And I was really confused. I have this 2-year-old coming up to me and saying, I'm a girl. Like I had a pit inside of my stomach. I'm like, my kid is not normal. I mean, this is not normal.
They took me to the doctor when I was 3 years old, and she held up 2 dolls. One doll was a girl and had girl parts, and one doll was a boy and had boy parts. And she said, "Which do you have right now?" And I pointed to the boy doll. And then she said, "Which do you want?" And I pointed to the girl.
The astonishing thing is I haven't seen that little clip, but I've seen so many different clips where Jennings, the mother, and Jazz tell so many different versions of this story. For example, the bit you've just played with Jazz saying that the doctor said X, Y, and Z. Well, I've seen interviews with the doctor who says a very different version of it. She, Marilyn Volker, who was the doctor, was a sex therapist. Not even Marilyn Volker. The idea that you would go to Marilyn Volker to find out if your kid was trans is so ludicrous. But Marilyn Volker says the opposite. She says that it was Jazz who said these specific things, and she says that Jazz said, "I want to have that body," looking at the little girl doll. But now I hear that Jazz says it's the opposite, and it was Marilyn who said that, which is much more believable. Who would ask a child, "These are 2 dolls, which doll would you like to be in the future?" I mean, that's ludicrous.
So she had several surgeries, vaginoplasty surgeries, and they were effectively botched because Jazz Jennings had what was called a micropenis. And the reason she had a micropenis was because she was on puberty blockers, which blocked all of the development that you would normally have if it wasn't blocked. So she didn't have enough tissue to create a neo-vagina, as they call it. And so it took several surgeries on over to correct or repair or resculpt whatever she had in that area. And we're talking about somebody that is very young. We're talking about somebody that's been medicalized since they were very young. They've been been indoctrinated into that thinking. They've got parents that are indoctrinated into that thinking. And some of that, again, another rabbit hole for another video, is trans housing by proxy. And did Jazz Jennings' mother have some form of that? What is going on there? What about the father? So guys, tell me what you think below in the comments about gender affirming care. I think the affirmation part needs to be completely taken out and replaced with heavy therapy. I don't think kids should transition until they're at least age 18, but even the verdict is still out on that in some cases, or in some opinions rather, because some people think that you're really not cognitively ready for such a decision until at least the age of 25. But I would say 18 because that's the legal age. Okay, fine. But the affirmation portion of this definitely needs to go right in the garbage. We need to give children and young people good quality therapy. And I think we're going to see a lot of this go away if we were to go in that direction. And I think that's very healthy. I think that we need to be on track to living in a better society mentally. I think we're suffering greatly in this area, and in the LGBT community, we're suffering greatly in this area, and it's getting worse, not better. There is going to come a time where we have to take accountability for things. And this is the area of accountability that needs to have the spotlight on it. But a lot of people are not ready to have this conversation, and they're still 10 toes down on affirmation and 10 toes down on gender identity and ideology and queer theory. And they've had all of these things sort of implanted in their brains and said to them over and over and over again. And now they're out there parroting it and repeating it and pandering for it. So let me know in the comments what you think about everything. Do you think affirmation should stay? Should it go? If you have an argument for why it should stay, put it in the comments. Let's talk about it. I'll see you next time.